Good morning, G-Fest 2023.
Good morning.
My name is Nick Crispino. Some of you may know me on Instagram as Kaiju Junkie, and I will be your host for this morning's podcast panel. Welcome to Godzilla, Bad or Just Misunderstood. Now, when the wonderful folks behind the scenes at G-Fest gave me the opportunity to put this panel together, I didn't really want it to be an echo chamber. So I've gathered these three wonderful gentlemen, all with varying opinions on the film. Some of us have mixed feelings about this movie, some of us love it, and some of us hate it. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you what side they are on.
All right, I am, name's Brandon Kirkman. I'm a local Chicago artist and comedian. I also run a monster movie podcast called Podzuki, so I'm really glad to be on this panel. I will be arguing on the side of it being just okay, so I'll be taking a very centrist Democrat stance on Godzilla 98, so I'm glad to do that.
Yeah. Woo. Hi, everyone pretty much knows me as Scrooge here. I've been coming here for a long time. I'm an unprofessional comedian. I will be arguing and dying on the hill of that it is an enjoyable movie. So please give me all the hate you like because it makes me happy.
Scrooge, further cementing his title as the most controversial man at G-Fest. Hates GVK, loves G98.
I don't get that still.
It's very confusing to me. We'll talk about that as we go.
And I'm Nate, an East Coast burgeoning writer and YouTuber, Zimzilla99, and the resident 98 hater on the panel. So I get to play to the crowd, so that's nice. Everyone loves me now.
I do want you to reiterate, how old were you when Godzilla 98 came out?
Oh, yeah, for context, I am the youngest person on the panel. I am 24, so I was not even born when 98 came out, so I have no nostalgia at all for this movie.
All right. So I guess a good starting point as any is, why do you guys have your opinions on this movie? Let's go down.
I mean, I feel like I want to mention the age thing too, not to be ageist about it, but it's more of growing up in the era of. I'm on the A-OK side because I have a lot of nostalgia tied to it. It was like in 97, 98, building up to that movie, if you're alive, everything was about Godzilla in an advertisement. Do you have that YouTube clip available? I wanted to get to something to show I think a lot of people who were alive at the time will remember instantly without any introduction or words.
Godzilla's hiding, and it's up to you to find him. Just buy a medium or larger drink. If you find a Godzilla, use your decoder to reveal what you've won. Uh-oh. I think I need a bigger box.
I did grab one more off here and then I'll play that.
Oh yeah. But I feel like as we're getting the clip up here, if you just were alive, you saw so many of those gosh dang Taco Bell commercials. It was insane.
Welcome to Taco Bell. Can I take your order?
Let's see. 1,000 burrito supremes, 700 Mexican pizzas, and what are those new gorditas? Hey, Godzilla, want something to drink?
Godzilla's at Taco Bell on 4 collector cups. And now you can put them in a cool Godzilla cup holder. Get them while supplies last.
But yeah, it's I feel like the reason I'm on the okay side of things is that it was such a time to be alive, and I have fond memories of it. But now getting to the actual film, just to buy a show of hands, who would say it was a great film? Okay.
Honestly, that's what I thought.
Yeah, truthers, I like that. Don't let the general populace get you down.
That's right.
Now, show of hands who thought it was a bad film.
That is way more holy.
Okay, now a show of hands of don't care, A-OK, just down the middle. These are my people right here. I wanted to bring up this point before we get into it, which is America's most mediocre president, which is Grover Cleveland. Famous for having 2 non-consecutive terms between our 22nd and 24th president, so mediocre that is the only thing he's remembered for. And I want to say that Godzilla 98 is the Grover Cleveland of Godzilla films. Because there's so many weird, unique facts like tied to this film that makes it supremely interesting and always fun to talk about. But when you actually watch it, you're like, okay, I guess that was a movie. Like, there's so many fun moments where it could have been a lot better, but you have to look at the time frame of where it was coming out from. This is directed by Roland Emmerich, came out in '98 famously, and he was on a hot streak of doing Universal Soldier, Stargate, and then Independence Day. And this is also after Jurassic Park came out and became like one of the highest grossing films of all time. So Roland Emmerich's like, okay, I don't really care about Godzilla, I want to make a Jurassic Park movie, but I still have to have a giant lizard in it. And then you got this film, you know, famously with Mayor Ebert running around, being a take on all the critics of his time. It's a hot mess, but it's a really fun hot mess to watch, much to the kin of like, let's say a Godzilla versus a smog monster or Ghidorah, if you're being technical. But it doesn't kind of like elevate itself to ultimate camp of like a Godzilla Final Wars, which everyone knows is the best Godzilla film, right? Oh, yeah. Thank you. I also wanted to point out before I turn it over, because we were a little tighter on our time for explaining this, I made myself instantly the villain of this board because we got together to talk about this and like, let's talk about our favorite Godzilla films. I'm like, well, my most hated Godzilla film is Godzilla 2000, and then all three of them like, that's my favorite Godzilla film.
But my top three, I never said favorite.
Okay, well, that's pretty high up there.
But keep in mind that list is changing all the time, so.
Yeah, I mean, because there's so much good Godzilla content coming out. I do want to say, the reason I mentioned that film too, and why I don't like it, and I think Godzilla 98 is an interesting film, not a great film, is because Godzilla 2000 is right after this, and they kind of had a return to form. And I find that kind of more boring in my opinion, where it's like it hits all the plot points you expect in a Godzilla film. It does it excellently, but it's like no big surprises. I think the reason I feel this is an okay film and fun to go back and talk about is there's just, like I said, so many strange things going on. Famously, like the climax of the movie, when you always are figuring like how are we going to take down Godzilla, it's like some big coup de grace or climax that happens. They just shoot a bunch of torpedoes at him and he just kind of dies. Like, I think that's such a good like metaphor of what Godzilla 98 is like, of like it just happens and then it ends. But that's, I feel like my points of why it's an okay film, but immensely fun to talk about.
You know, I was going to say, now that he brings it up, if you think about it, the relationship with Taco Bell is a great metaphor for the ending of 98, because just like Taco Bell, it hits you and you die. So, when you think about it like that, Taco Bell and Godzilla 98 kind of makes sense. Now, for me, two reasons. Why do I feel this way? Well, one, definitely the nostalgia part. This literally hits me right where I was beginning my journey with Godzilla. My dad got me into it. Like, it's just that natural progression between dinosaurs, reptiles, just obviously getting into Godzilla was the next step, because my dad and my mom used to watch the Saturday morning monster movies every week when they were kids. Yep, whoever was clapping out there. That's what got them into it. So of course, when I was born, my dad was into like, well, I gotta corrupt this boy quick and in a hurry. So I was already naturally getting into Godzilla at that point. So that was like the perfect, like, bam, that's right there. And on top of that, the toy stores by where I lived in Buffalo, New York were in full swing. So it's like KB Toy Store, Toys R Us, and I'd be able to just run in there as a kid. My parents would just pull up, park, leave me in there for like 40 minutes until they couldn't take it anymore, and I'd run into the Godzilla section and just start grabbing the Treadmasters toys and grabbing the 98 toys and just literally being occupied for like an hour straight. So there's that element. Now, second element, let me ask you a question. How many Godzilla movies are there altogether, just roughly? How many? 35. Okay. Can you say that every single Godzilla movie is a good movie? Like a good movie, a technically good movie? No. Okay.
At least we all agree on one thing.
So, is every Godzilla movie technically a good movie? No. Why do we watch them? Because we like them. So, you have a spectrum of so many different Godzilla movies that are, some are technically brilliant, like the original, and some that are technically horrible, but you love them. So over the years where people are like, oh my God, this movie sucks, it's so bad because, it didn't care about, Godzilla, crying about it. It's like, well, each Godzilla movie is literally made up of the same things that 98 is made up, which is, can't be characters, can't be dialogue, campy fight scenes and everything else. So the only reason why you like the other Godzillas is because you think it's cool to like those Godzillas because it's the Japanese Godzilla. Where I'm here to tell you it's okay. You're among friends. Come on out. Come give me a hug. It's okay. It's okay. Be yourself. Be yourself. There's nothing wrong with liking 98 because just like every other Godzilla movie, there's ups and downs. There's legitimately fun characters. Jean Reno in 98 is one of my favorite Godzilla characters. Love him in that movie. Yes, he is the Frenchiest Frenchman ever French, but I love that. Absolutely love that. Then you have horrible characters like Aubrey, or whatever her name is.
And Sergeant O'Neill.
Yes, some people in that movie literally are acting the equivalent of watching a brick being laid in a construction site. And then you have Matthew Broderick stealing every scene with having his mouth wide open, catching every bug that's coming into his mouth. So you have the balance just like every other Godzilla movie. And then you also have something that I didn't really think was up to that point, a lot of Godzilla movies there, which is the atmosphere. I love the rain, I love the dark, dirty, gritty New York City feel. So like I said, I think a lot of the time people get so caught up in like, God, this wasn't Godzilla, so I hate it. But if you actually take a minute to look at it through the lens of how many different media there is for Godzilla, it's a lot better than you think. And on top of that, I would rather watch 1998 than any of the legendary movies. Oh. That's right. Yes. No, boo me. Do it. Boo me. All right. See what makes me cheer. So booing me makes me stronger.
Everybody calm down. You all get your chance to fight Scrooge after the panel. Be patient.
Literally, 2014 will put me to bed. If I need to go to sleep, I will put on 2014 and I'll be out within 5 minutes. Why? Because there's nothing to it. There's so much potential. At least with 98, that was as simple as you gave a product to someone who didn't really care about Godzilla, so he just did whatever he wanted with it. But ultimately, it's still fun. It's still fun to watch.
We have that clip, by the way, of Roland Emmerich saying he didn't want to make that movie.
Perfect.
We definitely should play that.
Godzilla.
A movie I never wanted to make.
Can you elaborate?
Oh, it was like kind of one of these things where I did everything I could to not make the movie, and whatever I did, I kind of, I failed. I made him slimmer. I made him faster. It didn't look at all like the original Godzilla, and like I always said, yes.
Which is what I like hearing that. One, because it makes me laugh, and then two, because it gives you insight also of why the movie turned out the way it did. Because when you have that backstory, as I said, you look deeper into it, it makes sense. Because he really didn't care, but like I said, with the finished product, there's all these different Godzilla movies, so I don't look at it any different like any other Godzilla movie that I don't really like that much. Because, like I said, there's so much out there. It's okay. You're in a safe space. So you can like it with me, and we're going to be okay. So after the panel, want to come over and give me a hug, I'm more than open for it.
I think generally when it comes to my displeasure with the film, the more you look into it, you find these small little details that seem interesting at first, but then you just uncover something that's like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think what Scrooge is saying is true. There's a lot of Godzilla movies that aren't necessarily technically the best, but in a lot of cases when they were in their productions, they weren't aspiring to be technically amazing films. I mean, Jun Fukuda has gone on record for not liking his Godzilla films, and it took a long time for him to actually accept the films he made and actually enjoy them for what they were. While with Roland Emmerich, there's a long history we see with this film and sort of the production hell it went through, and what we could have gotten, which might have been a whole lot better, versus what we ended up getting, which ends up being a plot contrivance mess, as it were. But should we head over into the history?
Well, hang on. I didn't say why I think this movie is okay.
He's moderating, so he doesn't get an opinion.
Well, I'm with Brandon right here. I do have mixed feelings about the movie, and you guys mentioned nostalgia. Nostalgia is also a reason why I like this movie too, When I was a kid, I had parents that worked most weekdays, and my grandmother worked at the library at the time, and she would always bring me dinosaur movies and Godzilla movies from the library, and I'll be like, oh, I love these, and one of those was Godzilla. And I found that as I grew up, like you mentioned Scrooge, I feel like I sort of hated this movie because it was cool to hate it, and you get older, you mature, and then you realize, you give it a watch with an unbiased point of view, and I'm like, I no longer hate this movie because the angry video game nerd said this is a bad movie. I form my own opinions, and I just come to the conclusion that, yes, this movie is not perfect. However, there are aspects to it that I really like. Like for example, the entire first act leading up to when Godzilla first makes landfall in New York. That eerie, dark, foreboding atmosphere. The tension, the music, the tension, the fact, like the actors saying, like, we have this thing that's sinking ships. We have no idea what it is. Everybody's trying to figure out. And I like that. I also kind of like the fact that they did something a little different, kind of bold. Godzilla's design, or Zilla's design, whatever you want to call it, has grown on me over the years. And as someone who lives in New York City, I'm a little biased seeing the place I live in featured in a film, and it's fun to watch this movie and see all the landmarks you recognize, like, oh, I know that building, like, hey, I take that subway to work every day, hey, I know that block. So, the sense of like familiarity and all that. But Nathan, you mentioned the history. You want to take over?
Yeah, want to go to the next slide we have on this? So generally, outside of the 1980 Godzilla you see there, which was the Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 3D one they were working with, essentially around 1992 was when Sony had gotten the license to produce an American Godzilla film. Actually, right here in front of me, this was the original legal document that they had. This includes everything from what was who owned the likeness to the character, who would own other characters, distribution rights, etc., etc. And during this process, they actually had a lot of different people in mind to direct this film. It includes Tim Burton, Joe Dante, James Cameron, Ridley Scott even, Robert Zemeckis, the Coen brothers, Terry Gilliam, Alex Cox. A lot of people were tapped and a lot of people declined. Some people thought they couldn't really top the original. Some people just didn't have any interest. Spielberg was not approached, although he was mentioned, but since he had a scheduling issue, he was not someone who ended up being really tapped to work on the film. But that ended up being John DeBont, who would be the first person to helm the project. And with DeBont, that would be what we would see with Godzilla versus the Griffin. You want to head over to the next slide, please? And these sketches right here were done right before, when DeBont was working on the project, before Stan Winston and his team were working on Godzilla. These were done specifically by Ricardo Delgado, and it's this image of Godzilla here that would have been what we would have ended up with had DeBont's film gotten off the ground. And next slide, please. And that would evolve later on into the Stan Winston Godzilla design we see here done by Crash McQuarrie. And next slide for me, please. This is also the film where we would have been introduced to the Griffin, which is this alien monster that comes down to Earth and does battle with a Godzilla that would have been produced by Atlanteans, which is probably the most controversial aspect of this unmade film. Final slide, please.
You just mentioned made by Atlanteans. It's interesting to think they used that idea for the Gamera Heisei trilogy, I believe.
What's interesting is that this is still around 1992, so Gamera Guardian of the Universe has not come out yet, and really there's no marketing for Gamera at this point in the US, so it's a little bit of union there between Gamera and Godzilla around this time. And as the project kept going through development hell, DeBont was trying to get the film to be made around 180 million, and they were like, no, we'll do it for maybe 130. He was like, okay, 130. They're like, no, 100 million. He's like, all right, 100 million. They're like, let's try to get it to 80. And he's like, 80, okay. And they're like, no, we can't do this, we'll drop the project. So DeBont ended up leaving the project, and it was around the time with Emmerich coming fresh off Independence Day, and because that budget wasn't necessarily the highest, they were confident in Emmerich's ability to make a good blockbuster film on a lower budget, And essentially, he was given around 100 million for the budget, but that would end up ballooning into 150 million anyway. So the budgetary concern ended up not really being a factor as Emmerich blew past what they were offering to DeBont. But probably that was due to Emmerich coming off blockbusters already. But that's where we come to the production of 98, and the rest is really history. But these are just a few bits from a little program that you get with some of the 98 DVDs, mostly just talking about characters and what they went about in terms of making a film, where they went down to Mexico to work on it, and sort of just talking about how they really wanted to make interesting characters, really deep, dynamic characters that people really latch onto, which, in my opinion, ended up not being the case. But you can move over to the next slide for me, please. And the maquette right there on the left, that was actually an older model that they had worked on, where you can see when it came to Godzilla's design, they had a lot of Heisei influence, and on the right, that was some sketches that Toho had sent over as reference for DeBont's team, and would end up being sent over to Emmerich's as well. But stop right there. Sorry. Any other thoughts from you, gentlemen?
I like that it's a real evolution of man going on with Godzilla. Just gonna turn into a walking caveman at the end of it. Why did they go down to Mexico?
It's not really stated, but I think they just really wanted to be somewhere far away so they could not really have a whole lot of distractions and stuff as they worked on just writing them, because they did that in a really short time frame.
Yeah.
I think it was either 3 weeks or just 1 week. Next slide.
Again, I think this is just another representation of the all Taco Bell diet plan. You can see that he starts off a little bit thicker, but as he continues to eat nothing but Taco Bell, he ends up emptying himself and getting smaller and leaner. Again, that's why I think it was a good combination of the two in the film.
So diet beats keto.
So, outside of this being the Godzilla political spectrum right there, really, when it came to a lot of Godzilla's design here, we see that there is obviously that original Winston design that really strikes a balance of not only being unique, but also faithful enough to be recognized as Godzilla, even in comparison to more out there designs like Shin's or 2014's, and of course 54's, but then you have 90 all in that really far left quadrant over there, just doing what it wants to do. And next slide for me, please. And again, you sort of see that with even the Ricardo Delgado design still being a little different, but overall just faithful. And I think I can probably attest that a lot of people have issue with the film because of the design itself.
It's really weird. The American design is like, we need to make that tail erect as possible. Looking at it, it's very strange.
Breaking that American stereotype of being skinny.
Yeah.
And yeah, just looking more at certain designs and how they relate to one another. Next slide for me, please. And even as the franchise has moved on, we've seen a lot of really interesting Godzilla designs like Shin, Earth, Ultima, and although they've gotten more radical, we can see that at least with the more crazy Reiwa designs, they really don't stray too far away from Godzilla, and that's kind of what's key to character design, is understanding what makes a silhouette important, making it iconic, and sort of staying within your lane as a character, because outside of your rights, you don't really can work with a character outside of making sure that they kind of keep the essence, as it were, and 98 just doesn't seem to do that, really.
But see, again, this is why, real quick about that last slide, is that you see the evolution of Godzilla. You see how many times he's been changed and rearranged and whatnot. And maybe initially you're like, oh man, that seems really weird, but like that is the point. We're talking about over 60 years, and as you start thinking about it, it's like, it's just another version of the same character you've been watching your entire life. And it's one movie. If you want to include the animated show, which is really good, by the way. It's another reason why I am on this side, is because they went and took a couple things that were something I didn't agree with in the film and made it better. It's another example of that what has been going on ever since. 25 years later, you've had Shin Godzilla and the anime Godzilla, which are completely different designs than what we were used to. And, except for people complaining about that, now they're like, oh yeah, I love Shin. I totally love Shin. When it first came out, it's like, it's hamburger meat. It looks like, he's been grilled too long. It's like, It might be, like a culture shock at first, but then if you just take a minute and really think about like how creative teams, behind this are putting all this effort into it, you say, okay, it might not be for me, but I can look at something like this and say, you know what? It's not exactly how I like it, but I can appreciate it for what it is.
And I think what's also interesting too with the animated series is that the only reason why we ended up getting more iconic aspects of Godzilla, like the atomic breath, was specifically because of the fact that they said no, these aspects are key to Godzilla, and they kind of really bucked the trend with Dean and Roland, and they also weren't as involved with those projects in comparison. But this quote over here by Michelle Honda, I do like it because I think that at the end of the film, like the sort of antithesis to a lot of Godzilla films is what happens to Godzilla, and I think that in the context of the '98 film, Godzilla kind of being taken out easily by the American military sort of diminishes what that is for his character. And although Godzilla has indeed changed a whole lot, his indestructibility and being above the standard weapons at the time and sort of being a representation of what weapons acceleration and why we need to curb our destructive tendencies is important to Godzilla as a character. And I think when you remove those key aspects, you do get something different, but I think it diminishes sort of a through line of messages that can be gleaned from a character that lasts as long as it does.
And just before we move on to the next slide, that's one flaw I can't ignore with this film. In this movie, in a lot of Godzilla movies, he's portrayed mostly as like a force of nature rather than an animal. And in this movie, he's treated as an animal. In the movie, Nick Tatopoulos even says, he's not an enemy trying to evade you. He's just an animal. And in the other Godzilla movies, the force of nature, you can't really take down a force of nature. If you shoot a hurricane, the hurricane's still going to come. In this Godzilla, he's just taken down, he's a big animal, so that's
I never was a big fan of the fact that he took away his breath in the movie. I didn't like that. I didn't like the ending of the F-18s shooting him, but what he just said reminds me of what I said earlier, which is, he's just an animal, he's always the force of nature. Is he though? No, because a lot of the movies people are just like, he's just an animal, and I kind of care about him, I don't want him to get hurt. And then other movies like, those cinematic masterpieces like Megalon, is he really a force of nature? Is he really no, because not every single movie is.
Did I say every single movie though?
I'm saying, that's what I'm trying to get though, it's literally just one of those movies that's part of all of the different films and the different takes, and that's really why it just fits in the whole filmography of Godzilla, is because it's just another Godzilla movie. Might not be the best take, but it was just a take. That's why I feel the way I do.
But that's where I give, not to sidetrack here, but that's where I give kudos to the MonsterVerse. They really keep Godzilla's characteristics as a keeper of the natural order. That's something that stayed consistent throughout all three of those films. But you were gonna say something?
I feel like my interpretation now for Roland Emmerich is just a very super, left-leaning thing that American imperialism is stronger than atomic force now, so that's why we have to be worried about him. Maybe that's what we're looking at. I don't think he really cared or did any thinking on it. He's just let's just kill the beast at this point.
I definitely agree with that. That was as simple as just kill him off, because he didn't care.
Yeah. Lunch was coming late from craft service that day, and we gotta wrap this up.
Yeah, let's just kill him off.
Or it's gonna be another 160 million. So.
Yeah, and I think also, even with films where Godzilla is portrayed as the hero of the story, it's still the fact that he's still an overwhelming force of power, that whatever Earth is faced with, it's Godzilla that has to stand against it. And that still makes him that force of nature, just a force of nature that just so happens to be beneficial to us. And to a lesser extent, there are forces of nature that are beneficial to us in the real world. And I think that is, good thematically, but also, whenever we see Godzilla being portrayed more like an animal in the Japanese film, I think Godzilla 84 shares a lot in common with 98, but in the fact that they still elevate Godzilla to this level that's important, to where instead of Godzilla being attracted to fish as his main food source, it's still nuclear radiation. And although they treat him more like an animal where he uses birds and stuff to sort of get his direction to travel the world, or the fact that they are able to create a response for him to keep looking up at the flares as the Super X shoots the cadmium into his mouth, they strike a perfect balance, and I think that's important, is that remembering to balance Godzilla's power with his animal traits, but also with his thematic elements as well.
Sorry?
And these are just more lines that Emmerich said, where he's like, even when production was made, there was a big concerted effort to make sure that Emmerich was viewed as liking the Godzilla films, although he's gone on record as saying that he just sort of saw them as like movies that go to a Sunday and just laugh at. And other times saying that, oh, he really liked the original, or saying, oh, I never wanted to do anything with the original, I wanted to do my own thing. But it's just a matter of where you read more up on the production of the film. There's a lot of just contradictions that the director made. And you can go to the next slide if you like. And this is more stuff I'd asked in terms of Godzilla, the series production, and sort of what Emmerich was doing in terms of how much he was a part of it. And that's why I think that Godzilla series is just so much better than the movies, because although we still had that Godzilla design, we still got a more classic Godzilla. And I think that it lends itself better to a Monster of the Week kind of TV show, which is good. And with Zilla too, with that character, so for anyone, is there any lawyers in the audience at all?
Where are lawyers at?
Where are the lawyers at?
Do you really want to raise your hand for that?
You're not liable to raise your hand legally.
You are liable, yes. But when it comes to the agreement with Sony and Toho, they were able to use this version of Godzilla to however they pleased once filming concluded and the licensing expired. So the reason why you got to see the American Godzilla be renamed as Zilla is because of the fact that they already owned the likeness. So there's no conflicting of interest. It wasn't an issue where they rebought the rights, as a lot of people believe, but it was just a matter of, we have this character, we can trademark it as ourselves, and the reason why you see a lot more Zilla merch nowadays is because that licensing is just much cheaper, and that just so happens to be a little bit of office politics for you. So Godzilla 98 is literally a Schrodinger's monster. It is Godzilla, but it is also not Godzilla in a lot of ways.
I love this little quote by Roland Emmerich. It makes me wonder, like, he really didn't want to make the movie. Why were the Hollywood executives so adamant about him, of all people, making the movie? Like, they couldn't find somebody who had a little bit of passion?
I know for a fact that someone was there.
No, somebody was making a $sign symbol, because I think he gets it. He's got it.
It was money too, but also the fact that because the film had been in such development hell since '92, and they got on to '93, and so it was like, are they going to be making a Godzilla film? And since they didn't, that's why they ended up making Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 the way they did, and then they made Space Godzilla, and then they were like, finally, we'll make Destroya, we'll stop it here, whatever happens with the American film happens. And that's kind of what was up with that. And also due to the fact that since no one was biting on the project, Emmerich was like, oh, if I get the project, I'll do whatever I want. That was kind of another big factor with it.
I feel like that's just Roland Emmerich's fault at that point. Like, why even go near the project if from the get-go you don't want to make a Godzilla film?
See, that's where I would argue, though, have you ever seen like any major Hollywood production, in the sense of like why would they give it to somebody who didn't care about the source material? Have you seen any Hollywood adaptation of almost anything lately? I mean, most of the time you rarely ever get someone who cares in general. And in my opinion, I'd rather have someone literally just say flat out he didn't care and admit to it, and you can see where the faults are, as opposed to someone saying, yeah, yo, I was a fan since day one. I know all of them, you know, the Zukis, Godzuki, and all the, you know, the major players, you know, Brodan and all those guys. Yeah, I've been a fan since I was 5. It's like, and then I see whatever project they put out, and I'm like, I didn't really like it. I'm like, just because you say you're a fan doesn't mean anything. So I appreciate the fact that he was just straight up honest, like I didn't care, and I just wanted it so I could make more projects. Because that's more honesty. I like that, because it explains why the movie turned out the way it did. So it's like, why'd you give it to someone who didn't care? Well, I mean, do you really think that we need to ask about that logic in Hollywood? Because we see it almost every day with some new project that fails because the person who was giving it to totally didn't like what they were doing and just did it because they didn't know for money.
Yeah, and then when you get somebody who's super, super passionate and knows every little niche detail about Godzilla, you get Godzilla King of the Monsters. But I digress.
No.
Oh wow, let them fight.
What that movie was fine, but let's be real.
It was not.
That movie needs to be retitled to Godzilla, 2.5 hours of Michael Dougherty's fan fiction.
Just bring Charles Dance back as a villain. That was so fun. We gotta have him back.
I would agree with. I did like Charles Dance. That was probably the only thing I liked about that movie.
You should go back to the first one.
Huh?
Give me an egg to throw.
Yeah. Right here. Listen. Right here. You can hit me right here. You got like tomatoes and stuff. This is where my shirt's open. Right here. Target.
Listen, we can all come together and agree that anime, Netflix, Godzilla are the worst ones, right?
Yes.
That actually is a good segue.
I've never seen anything so boring in my life, and that's amazing because it's an anime too. How do you do that?
Right. And I saw all the legendary movies too.
Well, you mentioned the anime trilogy. That is a good segue to my next question. You know, in the 25 years since this movie has been made, we've had loads of Godzilla media come out. Some may argue is worse than '98. Anime trilogy, sorry.
Yeah.
Had something in my throat there. What are your guys' takes on that?
For like the worst since then?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because we're in such a like high and lows of Godzilla fandom right now. I like the Legendary series a lot myself. Then we have the bad Netflix anime movies. But then they did the series, and I thought that was pretty fun, even though it turned into techno babble towards the end of it. So it's really hard to say, but the worst definitely would be the anime Netflix films because you had 3 in a row that were just like did not know what they wanted to do and got time travel involved. It's just like, come on, get it together. Like, focus. It's just like, half of these times it's a bad project, you just want to be like, focus on something at least. Don't go all over the place. Which is interesting because Singular Point has the same issue where it just loses the focus towards the end of it and that's when it kind of peters out.
You're trying to tell me that when Jaguar became like a babbling baby that lost focus?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it got interesting, was when he started speaking like a baby, and I was sitting there going, what am I watching? I thought I was half asleep, so I thought I was like having an hallucination where like me and baby Jaguar were like hanging out or something, and I realized, no, this is the show, and I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. Now, can you all guess what I think probably the worst thing is since Godzilla 1998?
I know the answer to this.
What do you think it is?
Oh, wait, I think he knows.
What do you think, buddy?
Were you here
last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, buddy. No, go ahead. I love it. Because, again, let me tell you why, okay? So 1998, you hear from him, Roland Emmerich himself, why he did it, what the deal was. It was like him admitting to a crime. He's like, yeah, I did it, and I loved it. He's like, that's right, I killed him, I loved it. I loved every second, I'm going to jail for it. So he admitted it. You know, at that point, we're talking about trying to get an American adaptation in, and there, you know, it's a lot of like almost birthing pains kind of thing. We're talking about 25 years later, and to me, the best Godzilla-related media that's come out has been Shin Godzilla, because it was something different. Yeah, get clap for that, let's go. So it was something different, it was a different take. I wasn't sold on the design at first either, but then it kind of grew on me because the same thing with 98 is like, this is something new, something fresh. Another reason why I'm not a big fan of the American adaptations is because you have all this money, you have all the power of American cinema and marketing that other Asian countries don't have, like Japan doesn't have, and this is what you can only produce. Are snooze fests where I can barely see the monsters fighting because it's either too dark, too rainy, and if I want to watch that, I'll watch the Weather Channel, okay? And then I'll just take some figures and be like, it's like, what? Well, yeah, again, because you know what? I do love the rain. Guess what? In '98, I can see Godzilla in the rain doing stuff. That's why. Hey, in Gamera 3, the ending, one of my favorite monster movies. Can you see Gamera and Iris?
Yes.
No, don't be shaking your head at me. You can see Gamera and Iris. And Godzilla King of the Monsters, I can barely see what's going on. It's always cutting away. You're always cutting away. I did appreciate that Kong vs. Godzilla finally actually showed monster fights in its entirety, and that was the best part. And then they're like, this is really good. So now let me make the rest of the movie horrible. So it's not much to ask. At this point, what I'm getting at is 25 years later, it's not much to ask for a complete Godzilla movie. Good characters, good story, good monster action, all of it together. It's not that hard. But we continue, except for Shin, in my opinion, we continue to fumble and walk. Because it's either snooze fest, or complete incoherent babbling of like the animes, the single point animes, and for me it's like I don't know why we're still doing this. Like all these years later, we should finally be happy with one of the things. Like truly happy is like a fandom, and I don't think it's happening.
Let's hear from Nate, and then it'll be time to open the panel up to some questions from the audience.
Ooh,
go
I
ahead.
think even now, like with the Monsterverse stuff, I'm not necessarily the most happy with them, but I do think, at least in the case of 2014, it has a very similar case with 98, where you have that opening act, which is overall pretty good, and then peters out towards the second and third act. And although I will agree that the anime films on their own are pretty, not necessarily the most entertaining to watch, I do glean a whole lot in terms of at least themes and even philosophy from them in terms of what some of the characters are saying. I don't think it's delivered in the most appropriate way. I think that some of the they weren't able to really use the medium of animation to the best potential with the Godzilla anime films, and I think that was sort of rectified in Singular Point, which had the freedom of being this multi-episode kind of thing, and kind of getting into the inner workings of archetype and how that works. And I'm a sucker for that kind of sci-fi mumbo-jumbo BS, but with the Monsterverse, I think that they're just kind of, your basic Hollywood blockbuster. You go in, you eat your popcorn, you laugh at your friends, and you have a good time. I don't expect much from them, and I do think I like Shin Godzilla the most because it feels like a return to form, but also a divergence in a proper, respectful way where you see the political fallout similar to 54 and sort of dealing with Godzilla in a similar way, treating him with that kind of respect. And although this may seem apropos, but I'm excited extremely, and I think all of you are excited for Godzilla -1.
Yeah.
Yeah! Because I mean, we're going back to a pretty bare bones Godzilla design, post-war Japan, around the same time as 54, and I think that that's something that we need that's not only fresh, but comfortable, in my opinion. And I'm very excited to see what they'll do, and I think that we'll finally get that perfect blend of good Godzilla action, great story, and well-written characters, since the director's track record is pretty solid.
What about you, though? Your opinion.
Huh.
Well, you again. Come on.
Well, my opinion, I think the worst piece of Godzilla media since '98 was the Godzilla anime trilogy, and I think it boils down to a very simple reason. A very simple reason. When the first 5 minutes is like the lore of the first 5 minutes is way better than your entire trilogy, you are doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I would love to see even a mini-series of the lore prior to Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. I rewatch that Wikizilla timeline breakdown all the time, and I get more entertainment out of that 20 minutes of that video than I do the entire however long all 3 movies are. But yeah, that's...
I think altogether it was 50 hours. So,
God. 50 hours too many. But yeah, that's my opinion on the worst since '98. But we are running low on time here, so I think it is a good time to open the panel up to some questions from the audience.
I think a gentleman in the back put his hand up right away.
You, buddy. Yeah, you're like me.
Yeah, you and us.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, this is for the haters. Does the animated series redeem the feature?
Oh, we had a long discussion about that. He was asking if the animated series redeems the movie.
I think that because of how separate they are, I don't think it necessarily redeems the movie. I think on its own it is good, and I think that it doesn't necessarily replace, but it's a good supplement. And I think that if you want to watch something 98 related, watch the animated series.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like a small budget team, but you can tell they're huge fans of the franchise because they actually did a good job reiterating a lot of the monsters, especially how they did Mechagodzilla. Was pretty baller.
Yeah, Cyber Godzilla is a very interesting design and take, and Monster Wars, that whole arc was also interesting too.
You in the hat.
Okay. What do you think the franchise would look like if we had the John DeBont Godzilla instead?
The what Godzilla?
The John DeBont one. The unused one from the 90s.
I think that's a question for Nate.
I would say generally, if it did I think probably most likely it would have done a lot better than 98 because we would have just had a more faithful Godzilla. And I think that with DeBont's work, they have a very cult, classic kind of presence in filmography. So I think it probably wouldn't have gotten a sequel, but I think we would have gotten a very interesting standalone Godzilla film that probably wouldn't be as maligned as it is, but also we may not have seen the Japanese Godzilla return as quickly as it did because of 90 into 99 with Godzilla Millennium. So we may have had a sort of Reiwa Shin Godzilla renaissance well before 2014 had happened, in my opinion, at least.
Do you think the amount of people who hated this movie strictly because of Godzilla's design, do you think that number of people would have been affected?
I think there would have been a lot less people who would have hated the design, but I also think too, because of how radical the design was, they didn't want to show a whole lot of the toys and the merchandise because that would have turned people off, and that was one of the big reasons why there was such a big drop-off in people seeing the film afterwards. So I think if they had kept a very faithful Godzilla, we probably would have gotten better toy sales overall, and I think financially would have done a whole lot better, honestly.
Say what you will about this film. The merchandise, I think, is A+.
Yeah.
You read that red shirt.
So, 1994's Godzilla vs. Griffin, do you think it would be like better than the 1998 Godzilla? What are your opinions on that?
I think it would have been a lot better purely because Godzilla fights another monster. I think a big reason why this movie failed with the general audience is because people who aren't necessarily Godzilla fanatics know Godzilla as the big lizard from Japan who fights the bad monster. And they would go to see this movie, and it's just Godzilla alone fighting the military, and that may turn a lot of people off. So I think the idea of Godzilla fighting another monster would have resonated a little bit better with the general audience.
Yeah, I think it would have been great to see because that's the time frame of '94. We could have seen Godzilla skateboard, so it really just happened.
See, I would just quickly add, I think it would all depend on who's directing it and how it turns out. Because again, you have so many movies where you like the design of Godzilla, you guys buy the toys, you buy the monster he fights, but does it mean that the fight scenes were good? Or does it mean that you enjoy the entire movie? So it's the same thing. Like, yeah, the design might have been better with the Bond film, and the idea, or with the Griffin might have been better, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a good movie at all. It doesn't mean it was going to have good fight scenes at all. You have no idea how that would have turned out.
All right, we got for me, I'd say 3 more questions.
I think that gentleman's had his hand up quite a bit.
Well, getting from the cons, like we can all, I think it's safe to say we can all agree that's quite satisfying seeing all the incarnations harass the military, because after all, kaiju rule and the human race flat out stinks.
I'm not going to disagree with you there.
Do you want a hug, buddy? Because you can over here and get one.
This film hurt you.
Yeah, it's okay. Remember, you're among friends here.
I just love seeing humanity's ego getting first.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, I got
Scrooge just met his best friend. You right here in the front.
First off, great points on everyone.
Thank you.
Especially you, Scrooge, you really kind of turned me on the movie a little bit.
Oh, welcome. That's right. See, he's already converted to the gospel. Everyone get it? Can I get an amen? Amen.
Because of the movie, we got all the videos. We got a lot more interest in Godzilla. I mean, if you love the movie or hate the movie, after it came out, they're all being released more on VHS and everything. So
Yeah, to his great point, you think about literally because of the failure that was 98 was pretty much why the Japanese media got jump-started again. So, I mean, you can look at that how you want. Because of that, we literally got whatever was 5 more, Millennium films and where we are today, so.
Yeah, that is a good point. If there's one thing this film did was give Toho the kick they needed to pump out some more authentic Godzilla. You wrote that panel.
Really good backbone
Yeah.
for the whole panel. This is to the naysayer of 1990.
Oh.
Do you sometimes kind of roll your eyes? Because, I'm assuming that you have lots of kind of nuanced reasons for not liking the movie that go beyond kind of the surface level. Do you sometimes kind of roll your eyes when you hear people so often repeating those same surface level complaints over and over and over again? And you kind of feel the need to be like, no, guys, you're missing the point. That's not the problem. Or that's not the only problem, but everybody always keeps kind of repeating the same things over and over again.
Did you just read my mind? I think generally a lot, arguably we are a smaller fandom overall, though there many of you right here now. And I think that we do suffer in a lot of cases from a lot of people repeating the same surface level ideas. And I think that kind of going more in depth with all of these films and look at the problems on a deeper level, I think is important. And I don't roll my eyes, but I think it's just a matter of not everyone's going to have the time to nitpick and really go into detail on a film even from before I was born. So yes and no, and you should probably start doing psychic readings.
Yeah, I mean also that's an interesting point you bring up, which I feel like the toxicity of fandoms in general. You should be able to say there's a movie or franchise you don't like, and just because you thought it sucks, you don't need to prove it. Like it's always, I think we always forget it's always opinion, which is a good thing to remember.
Again, you are entitled to your opinion regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. What?
That guy right here, my man.
Yeah. Guy with the beard. What? Last one.
We'll call him Dr. Money Science.
What is it?
I think I'm like your negative version because you and I have the same childhood, Scrooge. I think the animated series made me hate the film more because it showed me what we could have had.
Yeah.
It just seemed like they didn't want to have fun.
Yeah.
And like the animated series is so much fun. Actually, that made me buy so much of that great merchandise was because of the animated series. And I think like honestly, it makes you more angry because like this could have been like this.
You are so right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are so right.
It hurts me more actually. That is so good.
What could have been?
What's also interesting too is the fact that although this film had a larger budget than The Lost World, it also opened up in more theaters, but it heavily underperformed. And I think that had we gotten probably a Godzilla that fit more of a cultural osmosis of the United States, there would have been a better capitalization on it. But we do have to take the good with the bad, and indeed appreciate the fact that we were more accessible to Godzilla stuff that was Japanese related. Because I mean, seeing as I never grew up in that '98 phase, all of my life was mostly the Sony released Godzilla DVDs, and leading up into Tokyo SOS, which led up into Final Wars and to where we are now.
All right.
If you do me a favor and show me on this Godzilla toy where Godzilla 98 hurt you, because I just want to make sure that I give you that hug, okay? Because what I would tell you is, again, back to what I said, yes, there were some things in 98 that could have been better, which the animated series fixed. But like every other Godzilla movie, you can literally sit there and go, I didn't like that. Oh, I kind of like that. That could have been a little bit better. This could have been a little bit better. And that literally is what this entire convention is about, is us telling each other what our personal Godzilla movie would be that's perfect. And then us going, yeah, that's right.
Godzilla or no. Just don't make it fan fiction like Michael Dougherty did.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that yes, it could have been better with that, but then you got Godzilla the animated series. So you're welcome.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this panel comes to a close. I'd like to thank you guys for making the time to come out. I'd like to thank my lovely co-panelists here. While we're not doing this too, we talked about how we got into Godzilla.
I want to give a shout out to my dad because he got me Godzilla vs. Megalon on VHS.
Stand up.
1992, 93.
Stand up.
Oh, for my own dads as well. My own dad stand up too for introducing me to Godzilla.
Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah. Dads in the house.
All the dads in the house, please. A round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your schedules to come listen to us battle about this movie. Please enjoy the rest of your G-Fest. Yeah.